Okay, hello and welcome to UNDP's live training series, Operationalizing Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. My name is Caroline Tresize and I work in the Climate Change Mitigation Team and the Carbon Payments for Development Facility, together with my colleague, Alexandra Salza, who will be delivering opening remarks momentarily. So before we begin, there are just a few housekeeping items that you need to be aware of to make the most of our session. You can follow the agenda, which is available on UNDP's Learning for Nature platform, and you'll find the link in the chat. You may also deliver your questions through the Q&A box, and these will be taken at the end. Due to the volume of participants, we don't expect to take all questions. However, the Q&A will be circulated together with the recording after the event. For information on UNDP's work related to Article 6, please reach out to us. We will post contact details in the chat momentarily. So now to kick us off, I'd like to invite my colleague Alexandra Salza, UNDP's Global Carbon Technical Advisor, to take the floor. Welcome, Alex, over to you.
Thank you, Caroline, and good morning, good afternoon all. It's great to be here today. As already mentioned by Caroline, I'm Alexandra Salza, Global Carbon Technical Advisor, and I'm managing the Carbon Payment for Development Facility. In collaboration with the UNFCCC and the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs of Switzerland, UNDP is supporting countries in their capacity building efforts for the operationalization of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. We are very happy to be hosting this event today, especially given the momentum surrounding Article 6 and the demand we are receiving from governments for support. For UNDP, empowering countries to take the lead is paramount. It is not enough for countries to merely be aware of projects within their jurisdictions. They must have the authority to prioritize projects based on their NDC targets and long-term low-carbon development plans. However, with this increased oversight and decision-making power comes also an increased sense of responsibility. Countries must possess the technical capacity to thoroughly evaluate and approve projects, knowing that they will be held accountable for their choices. And even if countries choose to rely partly on independent standards, it remains imperative for the government to assess the alignment of projects with national strategies and goals. Approval or authorizations by the government ensures that projects are in harmony with the country's vision, the Paris Agreement, the country's NDC, and the long-term low-emission development strategies. And to help address these new complexities of carbon markets, UNDP has set up a dedicated facility, Carbon Payment for Development, with a comprehensive support package that consists of 3 key pillars. The first one is on technical assistance and capacity building. The second on digital solutions to streamline the project implementation processes and transfer of credits. And here we are collaborating and coordinating with the members of the Digital for Climate Working Group, which consists of UNFCCC, the World Bank, EBRD, and IETA. And last but not least, we offer direct financial incentives through carbon payments for up to 6 million tons of verified mitigation outcomes. As part of the technical assistance and capacity building pillar, we are committed to build the processes for scaling up a Paris-aligned carbon market. And through a series of webinars, participants will be introduced to Article 6. This first of 4 webinars today is a public training session in which key considerations for participating governments and challenges and opportunities for the private sector will be discussed. Today we have a packed agenda designed to be as informative as possible on the overall operationalization of Article 6. But to kick us off, UNFCCC will provide the broader introductory context, and after that, experts from NEAN will lead a session about the key operational components of Article 6. And this will be followed by an overview of the new capacity building support offered through the Article 6 implementation partnership launched by the government of Japan. And finally, a panel session with representatives from UNFCCC, Ghana, Switzerland, and IETA. where we will hear, among others, experiences and first lessons learned from Ghana and Switzerland, who are front runners on Article 6. I welcome you all once again, and as mentioned earlier, I invite you to interact via the Q&A box of the Zoom link. And now, without any further ado, I hand over to Urban's Benyavanira, Article 6 expert at UNFCCC's Regional Collaboration Center in Kampala, to provide the broader introductory context of Article 6. Over to you, Urbans.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are joining from. Please confirm if my slides are visible.
We can't see them yet.
Just a moment. How about now?
Yes, go ahead. Thanks, Urban.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alexandra. And again, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening from wherever you are. Urban's Benyavanira are my names, as have already been introduced by Alexandra. So I will take you through what Article 6 means, what is at play, and also what strides have been made as far as operationalization of Article 6 is concerned.
So while we resolve some technical issues, please do use the chat. We've had a lot of demand for this webinar. It's a very exciting opportunity for UNDP and our partners. And we're really interested to hear from you, the participants, on whether you're already working in Article 6, where you're coming in from. So don't hesitate to reach out to us via the Q&A. I think you can submit questions as comments, and we will be responding and interacting with you there. Urban, you have the slides resolved?
Trying to reshare, sorry about that.
Okay. So we see from the chat, we have a few people who are already working in Article 6. So we have people from Bangladesh, and the recording will be available after. So definitely all materials will be circulated. So while we resolve this technical issue in the world of Zoom, this does tend to happen occasionally, we could perhaps move on to our second part, which is really diving into the context. Unless, Urban, you're able to resolve the slides now?
Please confirm.
Oh, yes, now we can see
Yes.
it. Okay, perfect. So back to you, Urban. Thanks, everyone, for your patience. Appreciate it. Over to you.
And sorry for our dear participants. So as an introduction, majority of you must be up to now, for example, be aware of the climate change impacts that we are facing in various parts of the world in terms of floods, disasters like wildfires and much more. But this continues to be the defining moment, the defining problem of our moment. There is no way an individual or a country can have solutions to solve this challenge on its own. That's why we consider multilateralism cooperation to be one of the best approaches in which we can tackle this challenge collectively. It is from this backdrop then that the Article 6 in the Paris Agreement gives this leverage through which parties and non-party stakeholders can adequately participate in this climate change fight to increase their mitigation ambitions, but also looking at how they can promote sustainable development. So to give you a brief of what Article 6 entails, it's an approach or a framework whereby parties can voluntarily participate in both market and non-market approaches. So essentially, Article 6 has 3 instruments or approaches, one of which is Article 6.2. In this approach, it is whereby a country A can collaborate or can cooperate with country B in activities that involve transfers of mitigation outcomes, or call them carbon credits for this matter, such that the country which has generated the carbon credits can transfer them following the guiding principles and rules that have been adopted by the Glasgow Pact, so that the receiving country can use those generated mitigation outcomes for achieving its NDC targets. This kind of approach is guided by the operation rules that have been set by the participating countries, but they should be done in a way that it ensures transparency, openness, and also following very systematic and robust accounting principles, because this issue is all about ensuring environmental integrity in a way that if a country has generated carbon credits, it shouldn't use again similar carbon credits to meet its own NDC targets, and also allow the receiving party to use the same. The decisions that the decision to CMA3 provides guidance of how this approach or this operation works, and I can invite you to visit that decision and get the details of how this Article 6.2 is operationalized. Another approach is Article 6.4. This is similar to what has been under the Kyoto regime under the Green Development Mechanism. It is a centralized system being guided by the UNFCCC Secretariat, but specifically the supervisory body which has been instituted to oversee the operation of the mechanism. One essential element that this entails is that there are some guidelines also to be followed, as I'll be pointing to in my coming slide. The last approach for Article 6 participation is the non-market approach, which is Article 6.8. Again, parties, non-party stakeholders are at liberty to voluntarily cooperate, but in this case, there is no any transfer of mitigation outcomes, so parties can decide to have an arrangement whereby they contribute to mitigation and adaptation goals in their respective countries, but those outcomes or mitigation goals cannot be transferred among the participating countries. So what are the participation requirements, especially by government? One of the key and most important requirements is that for a party to participate in this Article 6, it has to be a party to the Paris Agreement. Of course, it has to have communicated and is maintaining a nationally determined contribution. It also has to have in place tracking mechanism for internationally transferable mitigation outcomes, whereby the tracking should involve a registry to keep track of what has been generated, what has been transferred, what are the emission balances. As I alluded to earlier, this is all aimed at ensuring the transparency and also environmental integrity aspects of the mechanism. Also, most important also is to have arrangements in place for authorizing the use of ITMOs. So these are kind of arrangements whereby there has to be a communication of which cooperation that a country is involved in, what are the metrics, are they in terms of carbon dioxide equivalent or other metrics that the country is using to measure its ITMOs or something like that. It also have to have communicated the most recent inventory reports, whereby it shows all the GHG emissions and the like. Also, most importantly, also it is to the advantage of the openness of this system, whereby an implementing partner or a cooperation partner has to show how the participation in this cooperation arrangement enables it and also the other party to meet their long-term low emission development strategies and also the broader goal of the 1.5 degree of the Paris Agreement. So for more information, the annexes to the Glasgow decisions elaborate more on these participation requirements, so you can easily get to understand the nitty-gritties of what these participation requirements for parties are. So what is at play as far as these three instruments are concerned? Of course, the guidance to Article 6.2 has been adopted, and this involves also guidance requiring parties to track and report. And in that line also, the initial report that the countries are supposed to produce have elements that show, among other things, the metrics, how sustainable development aspects have been taken into consideration, whether the country meets participation requirements. For example, it shows information regarding its national determined contribution. Another activity that has been ongoing is the capacity building, whereby now parties and non-party stakeholders are being equipped to have some level of understanding in as far as participation in Article 6 is concerned. And majority of you must have participated, for example, in the joint UNFCCC UNDP online course, which started in February and is still ongoing. Again, the Secretariat has been involved in other capacity building related activities. For instance, in March, it held a hybrid workshop whereby parties were discussing the agreed electronic format. Again, last month, there was also a hybrid workshop whereby parties were discussing elements in the initial report. So this information is being considered and is going to be synthesized and reported for parties to have some much more understanding on how operationalization of Article 6 can be taken on smoothly. Again, we recognize that there are some parties which are in the readiness phases. For example, the East African Alliance and the West African Alliance on carbon markets and climate finance have been also involved in capacity building related activities. For instance, they have developed an Article 6 blueprint, which provides so much more guidance also on what are the essential elements or what are the guidelines that need to be considered for operationalization of Article 6. Again, there are other movers in the game. Like for example, the Swiss government has signed bilateral agreements with some countries like Senegal, Malawi, and Ghana. So you can take a look and see what are those cooperation agreements looking like. So in a way to inform or be like a learning by doing kind of exercise so that it can be entailed or adopted for one's unique exercise, even though it may not provide a one-size-fits-all kind of approach, but it in a way gives some highlights on how, for those that have not made any steps on how to move forward. On Article 6, just like on Article 6.4, just like 6.2, again, the guidance has been adopted. And this, among other things, also looks at issues to do with the CDM transition. For example, we are anticipating that by 30th June, the request forms for eligible projects that would wish to transition from the CDM to the Article 6.4 will be in place. And then eligible projects that have been under the CDM can begin the process of requesting for transition. And they can do this as up to 31st of December of this year. So for interested projects that are eligible, take note of these important deadlines. Again, the Secretariat has taken on capacity building programs, which started way back in 2022 with regional dialogues and surveys to solicit views from parties regarding their various capacity building needs. This information has been synthesized and presented to various fora for stakeholders to continue engaging and identifying more capacity building related needs so as to inform the Secretariat to come up with a very robust capacity building program, which was launched at COP27. And I can mention that since then, a series of activities have happened, and this capacity building program will be implemented over a 5-year period. Lastly, regarding Article 6, the adoption of the work program of activities is also something to really highlight as an achievement. And there are discussions still ongoing whereby the Glasgow Committee on Non-Market Approaches is supposed to identify and recommend additional work areas. And as a way of also ensuring transparency and equipping sharing of information, there is also a process of developing a web-based platform for this. So I thank you so much. And again, apologies for the hiccup that began with the presentation. I thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Urbans. This was a really interesting and very helpful overview, and also a good summary of what has been achieved so far in the negotiations. But now I will hand over to Miguel Riscalvo. He is CEO of NEAN and Global Article 6 expert. He will now dive deeper into Article 6 rules and requirements and talk about how international collaboration can contribute towards the NDC on the one hand, but also what the key engagement requirements and their implications on NDCs are. So Miguel, please, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra, and thank you, Caroline, for organizing this, and Urbans for the good introduction. I hope that you can all listen to me. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's fantastic to see some old friends in the audience from the CDM times in very different corners of the world. I hope that we can enjoy some time together this afternoon here in Spain, and we can have a fruitful webinar and Q&A session. So my presentation is a little bit longer. I will try to first do a quick recap on building on what Urbans just presented. Also, and we'll then focus on two main blocks. One is what are the opportunities, but also risks and considerations that countries need to take into account when participating in Article 6, specifically 6.2. Also, a second part will focus on interesting aspects to be considered by the private sector, what they need to take into account. Part of that will be to describe how an Article 6.2 activity is to be developed. And at the final part of the presentation, there are some questions that I've asked myself, thinking if I were the private sector player, what would I like to ask? And maybe that is a good sideways in the Q&A part. A couple of remarks is that this is an open webinar for a broad audience, and therefore it takes hopefully a basic approach that can provide insight for old-timers in the carbon market, but also to newcomers that are interested to understand what are the new opportunities under the Paris Agreement. And secondly, as you surely know, we at Negen Consulting developed together with UNDP or for UNDP and UNFCCC an Article 6.2 online training course that now more than 5,000 people has enrolled in, and builds on this short presentation of today. So if any of you haven't taken that course and are interested in the topic, I invite you to do so in the same platform where you have enrolled in this online webinar. So it's important to contextualize the Article 6.2 discussion around the final goals of the Paris Agreement that you all surely know is to try to limit temperature increase below 2 degrees, hopefully below 1.5 degrees. And it proposes to do so following an ambition cycle periodically, that by proposing more and more ambitious targets by different countries, drives all of us towards a net zero emissions scenarios. As you surely know, this ambitious cycle is driven by the NDC, national determined contributions that countries propose periodically as their voluntary targets to contribute to the Paris Agreement. In this context, we have already a key difference between what was the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. In the Kyoto Protocol, the targets were set up in a top-down approach. If you remember, only developed countries had commitments to emission reductions, and there was a limited role for developing countries. While in the Paris Agreement, on this ambitious cycle that I described, where all countries propose their own targets to contribute to that, we see a bottom-up approach. We have a larger role for developing countries that are taking themselves voluntarily on contributing to the Paris Agreement final goal through their NDCs. And as I mentioned a couple of times already, the word voluntary, it means that it's a relatively weak compliance regime that is mainly built on this desire to build a higher or strive towards a higher level of ambition every 5 years. And for developing countries, this has some implications. First, in the Kyoto Protocol, you recall, developing countries participated mostly as host countries for CDM projects, clean development mechanisms projects, and their main role was to approve these CDM projects or activities, specifically their contribution to the sustainable development of the country. And there was therefore a non-compliance risk for the host country because those host countries didn't have specific targets to achieve. While now in the Paris Agreement, we see that developing country has their targets through their NDCs and can then be part of different approaches to either be host of projects, but also being recipients of emission reductions from other countries. What we normally say, they can be sellers or buyers of mitigation outcomes. Then all countries, not only developed countries, are expected to report to UNFCCC on how mitigation actions has contributed to achieving these NDCs, contribute to sustainable development and environmental integrity. And therefore, developing countries who want to participate in Article 6 will have to implement, as Alexandra mentioned at the beginning, specific policies, institutional frameworks, and processes to be part of this Article 6 framework. As Urban's mentioned, these, I'm not going to go through that again. This presentation is mainly focused on Article 6.2 for cooperative approaches, but you will see several references for Article 6.4 that, as Urban's mentioned, is the mechanism that is more similar to the CDM in the Kyoto Times, while 6.2 is an approach, a decentralized approach that is built on basic guidance from UNFCCC and leave a lot of room for countries to decide how to participate. And it's important to say that while what we are going to discuss today or to see today is mainly done thinking of project-based crediting approaches, 6.2 is not limited to crediting approaches. 6.2 allow the voluntary cooperation among parties of the Paris Agreement without specifying what approach they follow. It can be very much, and we are already seeing that around the world, it can be very much project type, as we saw in the Kyoto Times. It can be through cooperative agreements between two countries, but it can also be one country that has a carbon tax that accepts carbon offsets coming from other country, or an ETS that is linked with other ETSs in other countries. And there's some remarkable initiatives of all of those type of cooperation that are already happening. There are incipient initiatives in the Pacific Alliance, for example, or in Asia of this type of cooperation. While 6.4, what we will see is more the typical project we were having in the Kyoto Times. So participation requirements from countries. Urbans has already mentioned them, so I'm not going to repeat them. I will focus on specifically a couple of concepts we use often in these presentations, and maybe not everyone knows about them and can be confusing. For example, we talk a lot about the authorization, and we several times mean different things. So important to see that one of the Paris Agreement requirements for participating was, if you remember the previous list, that the country needs to have processes in place to authorize the transfer of IDMOS and the participation. So 3 things need to be authorized by countries. You need to authorize the participation in cooperative approaches with other countries. We also discuss authorization in the context of authorizing the transfers of emission reductions or IDMOS towards the NDC of other country or towards other international mitigation proposals. And we will go deeper into that in a few minutes. But also the entities that participate in Article 6 activities needs to be authorized. So one word, authorization, that is used for multiple aspects. And as already mentioned, also important to understand that when we mention the authorization for transferring emission reductions from one country to other country or corporations. We are differentiating between the authorization for transfer for NDC use, and you can see in the screen, or what we call other international mitigation proposals. And here we introduce two concepts that, while difficult at the beginning, I want to highlight now. I already mentioned IDMOs multiple times. IDMOs are the emission reductions units that are the results of, in this case, Article 6.2 activities that are transferred from one host country. And there are different requirements that we will see on that an emission reduction unit need to comply with. Second important concept, or the third one, we discuss authorization, IDMOs, corresponding adjustment. As Urban says, it's very important to preserve environmental integrity while we work on achieving the Paris Agreement targets. And therefore, we need to introduce the concept of corresponding adjustment, so that if one country transfer the units to other country or to other organization, there are clear rules to make sure that only one time those units are accounted by a country. So it can be easier seen here. We have two countries that cooperate, and we have the transferring country to the left, receiving country to the right. But through the implementation of a carbon emission reduction project, there is an emission reductions in the transferring country that you can see to your left, and those units are decided to be transferred through a cooperative approach agreement to a receiving country. In the context, and to make sure that these are not counted twice, the corresponding adjustment is triggered, by which the receiving country account for those emission reductions towards achieving its NDC, because they've been financially supporting the project in the transferring country, and the transferring country accept to increase those emission reductions or adjust the emissions balance in their to adjust those emissions in the final balance. So therefore, either the transferring country or the receiving country accounts for the emission reduction, never the two of them. This is the typical case. Without going into details, it's important to mention that in some cases, the adjustment is not for 100% of the units. The two countries can agree to different approaches to do this, that maybe a percentage of the units stays in the transferring country, or that they are a percentage of units is agreed to be canceled and not accounted by any of them. But this is the generic mechanisms by which we say that a corresponding adjustment is a critical feature of the collaborative approaches under Article 6 to make sure that there is no double counting. IDMOs, as I mentioned before, needs to comply with multiple requirements. These are emission reductions from Article 6 activities that needs to be real. It needs to be verified, normally by an accredited entity, and must be additional. So these are emission reductions and removals generated after 2021 that can be measured in tons of CO2 or non-GHG metrics, as long as the two countries has metrics in the same, includes measures in the NDCs in those units. and are units that are generated from a cooperative approach in the context of Article 6.2 to be used by other countries, the example we saw before, to be used for other international mitigation proposals, or Article 6.4 units. To provide an example of what I referred to with Article 6 units that can be used for other international mitigation proposals, you may want to think about the CORSIA scheme in the aviation sector. This would be the case of an emission reduction project that they part or place in a host country, which units are authorized to be transferred to in the CORSIA scheme to an airline. As the CORSIA regime is also a regulated market, the country under airline cannot account both of them for those units, and therefore an agreement trigger the transfer, and that only one of them account for that. Normally the airline and the country, the host country, accept not to do that. Let me try to explain these complex charts that I've already referred to different things. We have multiple actors in Article 6, specifically Article 6.2. We have a host country, we have an acquiring country, and important to reflect that, as I mentioned before, under the Paris Agreement, this is not directly related with developed and developing countries, but most of the cases, that's the situation. The host country and the acquiring country reach a bilateral agreement to support each other in achieving their NDCs. The overlying idea is that the acquiring country wants to support a higher level of ambition in the host country by financially supporting specific carbon offset projects in that country. That country, the host country, realizes that by accepting that support, they can strive towards a higher level of ambition of the NDC. They can use that financial support to do complex projects that goes beyond their NDC, that attract interesting complex technologies for the country, and therefore enter into that bilateral agreement and agrees to do a corresponding adjustment. By accepting that, the host country will accept that the units will be accounted in the acquiring country NDC and not by the host country. As I said before, this needs to be authorized by the host country, and later on, and the project developer normally is part of this structure supporting the actual implementation of the projects. The project developer may have a purchase agreement of those units with the acquiring country and requires, remember, the authorization of the units of that project to go from the host country to the acquiring country in exchange of the payments. Also remember that in some cases, these units are not only used for the NDC of an acquiring country, but can follow a parallel track that you see in the right top corner in red, that is using those units for other international mitigation proposals. As Alexandra mentioned before, and we are going to go deeper into that now, countries has several things to put in place to make this happen, as you can imagine. And it's important to say that different tools has been developed over time to help countries to understand where they are and what are the different requirements they need to have in place. In that context, UNDP and Switzerland, for example, has been using a tool developed by the World Bank called MAP, International Transfer Readiness tool, that help countries to understand where they are in different critical assessment areas which are the requirements in the context of the Paris or the Article 6 rule book that they are already aligned with, and where additional work and capacity building is needed. So in this voluntary cooperation between countries, what are the benefits for countries to participate? So we can define 4 groups. One is to attract financing to support the implementation of mitigation and adaptation actions in the country. So they can, as you can see below, support the NDC implementation, mostly of the conditional NDC components, reinvest part of the revenues obtained in other mitigation actions. And this is sometimes done through, as I mentioned before, leaving some of the ITMOs in the country and not transferring the 100% of them. As I said, ITMOs need to be additional and preserve environmental integrity. So in that sense, we want to see that these cooperative approaches focus on financing high-cost mitigation measures, new technologies in the countries that has a high implementation risk and therefore require for this extra support. And needless to say, this cooperation between countries in the context of Article 6, beyond emission reductions, are a key support to achieve the sustainable development benefits of the country. So it can help us to implement our NDC, can help the country to attract finance to complex technologies new to the country. It can help to have additional national revenues to channel them towards climate change, both mitigation, adaptation, fighting, and support sustainable benefits. But with these benefits, we also have some risk for participating. And I mentioned already some of them. First of all, you recall the need of a corresponding adjustment. It was triggered by the need of avoiding double counting. That is the mechanism in place to make sure that there are not 2 countries, one country and one regulated organization that account for the same units. There is also a risk of over-transferring ITMOs. You recall I said that the key difference between the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement is that every country in the Paris Agreement has its own targets that needs to achieve through domestic mitigation actions and domestic efforts. Some country has differentiated in the NDCs, unconditional targets. Unconditional targets are those that needs to be done through this domestic effort. So when we transfer units to other country and do a corresponding adjustment, remember that we accept that the other country accounts for the emissions. And therefore we need to find something else to achieve our targets. So the more we transfer, the more we accept to do a corresponding adjustment, we attract finance to our country, but we also need to find other projects to achieve our NDC. So countries need to be very careful on not transferring the long-hanging fruit, not accepting to transfer to other countries the easy to implement projects. Because if you do so, you are keeping for yourself the most difficult projects to implement, and you need to implement them to achieve the targets that you have committed to achieve. So this is the risk of over transferring units. To minimize that risk, you need to understand very well your NDC. You need to understand very well the implementation cost of different mitigation measures, and what is the country ready to do by itself, and what is better to be done with others' support. Related to this risk of over-transferring units is the risk of an opportunity cost. By each unit that you are transferring, remember, you need to achieve other units yourself, and therefore there is an opportunity cost in doing so. You need to find something else to reduce your emissions and achieve your NDC target. And again, if you transfer the easy to implement ones, you are left with the difficult ones, which represent a huge opportunity cost. The fourth risk I would like to highlight today is related to the effort that Alexandra highlighted at the beginning of the management and infrastructure that countries need to put in place to participate in Article 6. You need to develop, countries are developing different what is normally called Article 6 frameworks, meaning policies and institutional frameworks that organize the participation in Article 6. That implies a cost, it implies resources. So you need to make sure that if a country decides to go down that route, the benefits you're getting from participating in Article 6 are obviously higher than the cost and the effort the country is doing by assigning people and resources to do that. You may see that some countries are imposing administrative fees when they authorize projects to cover some of these costs. Implications, so we've highlighted 4 different types of risk. When it comes to implications or obligations of countries, the first one related to the last risk is the need to develop institutional and regulatory frameworks that organize the participation. So this means institutional arrangements, which institution is the designated entity in the country to do the authorizations we discussed before. What's the policy framework that establishes all the processes to, for example, approve projects, approve the participation of different entities, authorize the transfers, do the corresponding adjustments, etc. There are also some implications related to specific reporting obligations if you participate in Article 6.2. And as has been mentioned by Alexandra, our urbans, they need to build capacity within government institutions and the private sector. This structuring of a regulatory policy institutional framework is very much in detail explained in the online course that I mentioned before. The obligations for reporting that I mentioned that are linked to the participation of countries in Article 6 are very specific and are extra for those countries or come on top of the requirements that the rest of the countries have. There are 4 aspects to report: the compliance with cooperative approaches where they participate. Second, how the corresponding adjustments have been done to avoid double counting. Specific details of the cooperative approaches the party is involved in, and specific data related to the IDMOS. And as you well know, Article 13 of the Paris Agreement introduced the enhanced transparency framework, with the main reporting instrument being the annual transparency report, and some of these obligations to report periodically if you participate in Article 6 comes or needs to be included in this biannual transparency report. In addition to that, there is the obligation to report an initial report, and then information to be reported annually in an Article 6 database to UNFCCC. I will stop here and say that, remember that I mentioned that the participation in Article 6.2 is voluntary, and the rules of the game are established by the countries that enter into cooperative approach. That doesn't mean that it doesn't come with some obligation to UNFCCC in the form of informing the international community through UNFCCC of what is happening as part of those agreements, how they are functioning. All of this leads to, also some implications. I think I mentioned that, but important to say is the obligation to track the NDC, to make sure that how do you measure where you are with your NDC, and define a specific key indicator related to emission reductions and non-emission reductions to see where you are, and how the participation in these cooperative approaches has increased the level of ambition. Countries need to have a registry or access to a registry. And this second part I would like to emphasize, there is no requirement for every country in the world to develop their own registry. There are multiple fantastic initiatives by UNDP, by the World Bank, by others, to provide countries with the technology and the infrastructure required to have access to a registry. And also, as I mentioned before, the annual report to the Article 6 database. When it comes to the registry, it's worth mentioning that UNFCCC is also mandated, I think, to develop an international registry that parties can use. So all of these, to conclude this part of the presentation, leads to the need for a country to develop a strategy to participate in Article 6. Why? Because you've seen that there are multiple opportunities and benefits. There are also multiple obligations, and it costs money in the form of resources, and your people will have to be focused on that. So you may need to make sure that your benefits are higher than those costs for you. It's a fantastic opportunity to attract, as I said before, climate finance, carbon finance to a specific targets of the economy, and those that are more in need to achieve the NDC. So this strategy to participate in Article 6, as you can see, should ask itself or should respond to which sector should be part of Article 6.2 cooperative approaches agreements with other countries. Which type of activities within these sectors? How do we align this participation strategy with our medium and long-term objectives? And how do we make sure that we have the capacity to handle all of this? A well-established strategy translated to Article 6 framework and processes for implementation will give security to donor countries and international cooperation institutions, and will facilitate the cooperation with you, will give a clear signal to project developers, and will inform your sectoral ministries and government agencies of the rules of the game. So what are so until now I tried to summarize some of the key aspects of and definitions of the Paris Agreement and the Article 6, and why Article 6 is relevant, why do we need to cooperate, and what are the risks, implications, for doing that, and why it's worth it to have a strategy in place. And very important concepts like the need of doing corresponding adjustments, that not two countries or a country unregulated institution can account for the same units, right? That all of this needs to go through different authorization processes, and the need for IDMOs, for emission reduction projects, activities under Article 6.2 to be additional to, meaning that it increases the level of ambition of the countries towards achieving the Paris Agreement sector. The second part now focuses on what are the opportunities for the private sector to participate in Article 6.2. And without going through this chart again, the main activity or the main opportunities is to be a project developer, support the design implementation of projects in the context of Article 6, even when it needs to be realized that Article 6.2 is a country-to-country based approach, where project developers can obviously participate in supporting the design and implementation of projects, where obviously they need to be rewarded for. Remember that the participation in Article 6.2 must be authorized by the parties. And for you, in case for those participants that comes from countries, to attract private sector attention, as I said before, you need to have a clear strategy in place for doing that, right? And you need to inform them of what type of projects you want to implement through either Article 6.2 or 6.4. What's your strategy or your policy for granting corresponding adjustments, authorizations with corresponding adjustment to those projects or not? So what should a project developer do for engaging in Article 6? This is what I would do, right? First, for the country I'm interested on, I would see if they have already decided which type of approach or mechanisms they prefer for the type of projects I want to implement. Do they already have a policy in place that inform me of what do they want, what do they allow to be done as a voluntary carbon market project? Are they okay with doing corresponding adjustments for voluntary carbon markets projects or not? Which sectors and activities they want to promote through Article 6.2? Or do they have a specific sector and activities that they want to promote through Article 6.4? As I said before, this is normally done as part of the Article 6 framework and strategy development in the country. And step 2, you can see that we need to know what's the status of development of this framework, because there are many countries working on that. Only a few of them with this framework already in place. We will hear from them later today. So the more advanced they are, and even if that framework is already fully implemented, obviously the risk for us as a project developer is lower, right? In that policy, we need to, that framework, we need to check what are the conditions related to accounting methodologies that they accept. What are the requirements the country impose for validation and for verification? Do they have a pre-authorization process that gives us some security at the early stage of the project? Remember that as part of Article 6.2, the rules are established by participating countries. Therefore, how a project is developed can be very different for one country than another country. Type of methodologies they accept, if and when they require validation of the project, if they give us a pre-authorization or not, etc. So third, I will then go to see what type of contributions the countries expect from us as a project developer, because there are countries that they have decided that a percentage of the emission reduction from a project will have to be canceled to contribute to overall mitigation, what is very good, but it has a cost, right? Other countries has decided that a percentage of emission reductions needs to be canceled or needs to stay in the country to help to domestic mitigation. A percentage can also be asked to stay and as a contribution to an adaptation fund, and other countries are imposing administrative fees. It's important to say that nothing of this is established for Article 6.2, while for Article 6.4, that remember is already regulated at the UNFCCC level, the international community agreed that a percentage of the emission reductions will be cancelled and a percentage will be used as a contribution to an adaptation fund. So you as a project developer may want to know all of this because you need to add all of that to your financial model. Step 4, you are doing this project as part of a cooperative approach. You also need to check what are the conditions for not only for the host country, but also the acquiring party of those units, because they may have specific processes in place that you need to comply with. I would then look at the conditional and unconditional NDC and check if there is positive, negative lists that tell me which specific activities the country likes or accepts, right? And you have this type of positive, negative list in host country and acquiring countries. This is example, for example, is from Switzerland, right? The positive list means the activities that they want to promote as in cooperative approaches. Negative list is they no go, they don't want these activities, so don't waste your time proposing them. Mm-hmm. So these are the basic considerations and steps I would say personally do. The first 3 things I would do if I had to develop an Article 6 idea and project. So this translates in what is the activity cycle, how this is developed, and I will not stop too much here. The activity cycle for Article 6.2 activity, if we discuss this in the context of project type of activity, that is what we've seen now in most of international cooperations, we can say is similar to the processes implemented under the Kyoto Protocol. And obviously the overall process is there to prevent and to ensure, environmental integrity and prevent double counting. As many of you know, because looking at the list of participants, you are all involved in somehow in this type of activities. This environmental integrity is related to the accounting methodologies that are used, the monitoring and reporting requirements, the validation verification requirements, registration requirements, etc. So this chart summarizes already what we call an activity cycle. First is to understand what are the eligible activities for Article 6.2 in that specific country or countries if we are doing this under cooperative approaches. And we have already discussed this, right? So these activities are part of the strategy defined to the country. By the country, they need to be well aligned with their NDC. They need to contribute to a higher level of ambition. And normally we see these detail in positive lists and negative lists, as we saw the case of Switzerland. And countries promote the identification of eligible activities in two ways: a top-down approach, where the country says, these are the type of projects I want. So they open a call for proposal and they open it for you to, as project developer, or for the project developers to apply using standardized documents. And you can see here the ones for Ghana, the mitigation outcome activity design document, and the case of Peru, a project idea note, right? So, and then there are other countries that they accept a bottom-up approach, meaning those that you can propose a project when you want, right? Once you select this activity, you do a detailed design of the projects in these mitigation activity design documents. This activity is normally registered as initially accepted by the country and goes through, and in most of the countries, they go through an independent assessment at the design stage, is what we call validation, done by an independent entity external to the government. The validation entity will tell the government, yes, this project, if it is implemented as it is designed in this document, it will lead to emission reductions units that can be transferred as IDMOs. Some countries, not all, based on these first independent assessments, issue a pre-authorization or approval. That is very useful for a project developer because it gives the project developer more security on the process forward, because they have a document from the government saying this project is initially accepted. If it is implemented, as you say, you are going to implement that. After that, the project starts operations, the monitoring and verification is done based on specific methodologies, accounting methodologies, accepted by the participating countries. And as you know, the verification of emission reductions take place, normally annually, but can be different. And this verification is also done by an independent accredited entity normally that will tell us, yes, this project has been implemented as promised and has led to X tons of CO2 emission reductions. After that is certified, the country needs to trigger, as you see in step 8, the authorizations of IDMO transfer to a different country or for what we call other international mitigation proposals. Remember that in step 9, we have some obligations as a host country and receiving country to track where each unit is going and has gone, and have a registry or access to a registry through control that. So this is a very a quick overview of 9 steps of a process to develop an activity. For those who come from the CDM times, is similar to what was done under Kyoto, but take into account 2 important things. Not all countries follow the same process, because remember, under Article 6.2, countries decide the rules. So not all countries do validation, for example. Not all countries give you a pre-authorization letter. Second, the methodologies, accounting methodologies, and the requirements for who is accepted as a validator verifier is also decided by and only by the countries. So this was a quick summary of the activity cycle. When you receive the presentation, you will see that there are more slides that elaborate on this. Obviously, you can also go to the online course and have way more information. But in the few minutes I have left, very quickly, I would like to answer some typical questions that we hear from countries, specifically the private sector, right? So, for example, how are countries developing the rules for us participating in Article 6? Well, I remember what I've said. Countries should have an Article 6 strategy. That is reflected normally in what is by many institutions called Article 6 frameworks that establishes the rule of the game. In addition, if you want to develop a project that is sponsored or supported by Switzerland, Sweden, Japan, receiving countries also has their own requirements, and they are reflected in the bilateral agreements. So two key documents you need to look at: bilateral agreements. You plan to do a project as part of one of those, the status of implementation, and the details of the Article 6 frameworks. So which countries has already Article 6.2 participations, frameworks and strategy in place? Well, we don't know, and I doubt anyone knows, because it's a very fluid situation now. But we think that around there are over 10 finalized cooperative approaches, 50 other cooperative approaches where there are already a memorandum of understanding. The most active countries supporting the implementation of projects in other countries is Germany, Japan, Korea, Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland. And countries that they are already working on, or they already have an Article 6 framework, includes, and this is in alphabetical order for no one be upset because it's not the first one. So Cote d'Ivoire, Georgia, Ghana, Indonesia, Malawi, Morocco, Peru, Rwanda, Senegal, Thailand, Uruguay, Vanuatu, and I would say most, if not all of them, supported by UNDP in this endeavor with other institutions also. So how do private sector participants decide if they do Article 6 or a voluntary carbon market project using gold standard or VERRA? So a project developer can participate in both. You should ask yourself, how are these two markets evolving? Is there any restriction imposed by the host country on the development of offset projects under the voluntary market? And I'm sure you have all seen recent news on countries deciding that they don't accept voluntary carbon projects to be developed, or if they are developed, they retain a percentage of or all the emission reductions coming from them, etc. What is the requirements of the standard and accounting system for the company? In the case you go for the voluntary carbon market and you are doing that for a buyer, a corporate buyer, if that buyer is reporting their emissions as its inventory and tries or pretend to offset their emissions and report that through one of the multiple reporting systems in place, is there any condition on that reporting system for the units the corporation can use for offsetting? For example, are voluntary carbon units or offsets allowed to be used without corresponding adjustment for offsetting the inventory under that specific reporting scheme? So how do private sector choose between 6.2 and 6.4? Well, again, is you can have projects under 6.2 and 6.4. It's not you don't need to offer only one of them. Remember, Article 6.4 is a centralized system with well-established rules from UNFCCC top down. is less demanding from host country governments, but you still need the approval of the host country to do Article 6.4 projects. So you still need to find a country that has a strategy and specific processes in place for doing that approval. 6.2 has been used more broadly until now because it's been already there for longer. And I think everyone is interested in finding more private sector participation in Article 6.2, so that can be good. What is called an ERPA or MOPA now? I think in this world we love to change names. So mitigation outcome purchase agreements or emission reduction purchase agreement is the document that governs the agreement between the project developer and the involved countries in the case that is appropriate, or the corporations in other cases. This is there's a specific examples out there of what a MOPA for Article 6 could look like. This one is from AITA. There is others recently launched, for example, by GGGI, and you can get additional information for that. And last couple of questions. What determines the price of an IRMO? Well, multiple factors, right? But at the end, the IRMO needs to be agreed upon with the parties involved in the case of a cooperative approach. And in the case of a project developer needs to understand, as I said before, what contributions the project is expected to do. But normally it will be related to the cost of the implementation of the project, the opportunity cost that I described before, and sorry, this went backward, and other administrative costs and percentages of contribution that the countries require the project to have. Timeframes, you should be aware that some countries are accepting emission reductions with a limitation of time, many of them until 2030 when an NDC cycle changes. And last, two last questions: when will be Article 6.4 operational? We have UNFCCC in the panel, so they know better than I, but there's supposed to be at the end of or next years. The supervisory body of Article 6.4 is having regular meetings. One is coming up, and there are still some steps missing, like having a registry. They are working on updating the CDM methodologies and establishing new methodologies, new accounting methodologies. And typical question is, what about CDM units? So remember that there are CDM projects that may transition to Article 6.4 with some requirements, and they need to be approval they need to be approved by the country where they are based and comply with any additional requirements. Projects might continue to use CDM methodologies until the end of 2025. And CERs, the units, cannot be transferred into 6.4, but they can be sold and used by countries for the first NDC without corresponding adjustments. So this was the end of a somehow long presentation, but I think I more or less stick to my time. Allow me 1 more minute to summarize this. I tried to explain key concepts of Article 6, the opportunities and risks for participating countries. Also, what are the different steps to develop Article 6 projects. And then I focus a bit more on what I would do if I were now a project developer and want to do a country in a project. What would be the 6 things I would check? And then I tried to respond to some of the typical questions or more basic questions that we often get when we discuss Article 6. So hopefully this was useful. If there are more questions, we will have time to answer them later on. And with this, I pass the floor back to Alexandra to introduce the panel and moderate it. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Miguel. I might just keep you there one moment because we have a lot of questions that have come through. Thank you so much. I think we've had over 100 already, or I can see 76 here. So there's a lot of interest in your presentation. There's one actually that stood out because it's very much a pragmatic question, and it's coming in from Vinay Diodhar, and he's talking about account. So his question is, or her, I'm sorry, I'm actually unsure. So CORSIA accounts for emissions from international aviation. How and where are emissions from domestic aviation accounted for? Are they included in the inventory of the country? When some airlines operate both international and domestic flights, are they required to account and report emissions from these two sources separately? This question stood out because it's very much the application. So I'm wondering if you have an answer for that. I'll put it in the chat as well. And if not, we can maybe come back to it. But I think that's a good example of
good, thank you, and good question. This is more an accounting question and inventories related question than Article 6. And I should admit I'm not an inventories expert, but as is well said, CORSIA is related to international aviation. Units using CORSIA require a corresponding adjustment, right, to avoid the double counting between the country and the airline. Domestic aviation is organized and regulated domestically, and I think the question was if that is reported also in the national inventory. I assume so, and the rules for what airlines and flights are regulated domestically, for example, in Europe is defined here, and the rules of the game are well explained, but that is not under the Article 6, I would say. Yeah, I can maybe elaborate on that a little bit more later after the panel. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much, Miguel. And there's a few other questions. So just to reiterate, there's really a lot of good ones. So we'll be addressing them later, if not during this webinar, and we'll be sending the Q&A around to all participants. So we appreciate it, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the chat. There'll be another Q&A session after at the following. But now I will hand to Alexander to continue and to introduce our next speaker from Japan. Over to you, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. And thanks, Miguel, for this really very interesting presentation, which triggered so many questions. So the next presenter is Koto Kuroda from the Ministry of Environment of Japan. Koto will present the objectives and goals of the newly launched Article 6 implementation partnership, which was established by the government of Japan and now coordinated by IHS. Koto, over to you.
Thank you for your introduction, Alexandra. So hello, I'm Koto Kuroda, from the Ministry of Environment in Japan. And today I would like to introduce about the Article 6 implementation partnership. So I do have some slides. Please give me a moment to share screen it. I hope you can see that.
Yes,
okay?
Working well, okay. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much. All right, so I don't think I should take too much time because we want to leave some time for the questions, because I myself really learned a lot from all the presenters up until now. There's always much more to learn, so thank you very much. So yeah, today I will be talking about the partnership that we launched last year at COP27. So let's go. Okay, there. All right, so just as a context, I wanted to show this graph, which comes from a report by UNFCCC. Well, already we've been talking a lot about Article 6 in the past hour, but there's a statistic saying that actually, there are 122 countries that mentions the use of Article 6. So that's quite a lot of countries. And now, now that many countries are already mentioning using Article 6, what's important is that, to actually implement and Article 6, we need a lot of preparation for this. Just as Miguel was just talking about, there are so many steps and requirements before using Article 6. So capacity building is really important. And to show this, I have this graph, which we made from a survey, which we did just last month with some of our partner countries. So 23 countries participated in this survey. And what we asked was that, how ready, how prepared are you for each of these Article 6 institutional and governance arrangement components? And on the graph, you can see we asked about Article 6 readiness, authorization, tracking, which includes recording and reporting, project development and implementation, and baseline development. And this is the answers we got from the countries. And you can see here, there is some bars of pink. The pink shows that the countries answered that they have not yet started working on this component. And also you can see the darker the blue gets, the more prepared they are. But you can just see that, there are many, many countries who are still not prepared enough to use Article 6. And we also asked these participants whether they needed capacity building in any of these components. And all of our respondents said that they do need capacity building. So that's why you understand that capacity building is really needed to implement Article 6. So we launched this partnership called the Paris Agreement Article 6 Implementation Partnership. So written on the overview there, this partnership promotes international collaboration for capacity building related to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, including by sharing good practices and supporting the implementation of Article 6. So here you can see a diagram. We tried to write, that we already talked about so many people who are involved in Article 6 in the previous presentation. So, there are the countries have many requirements in order to implement Article 6. And, to actually get the projects going, we need the private sector involvement, and we also need research institutions. And of course, we have UN agencies, UNDP, of course, and like multilateral development banks. And already we had the first presentation from UNFCCC, but the regional collaboration centers, and there are also regional alliances. These are all, stakeholders who are taking part in Article 6. And we really think that, it's important for all of these stakeholders to work together and share their knowledge and help each other to implement Article 6. So we have written in the area of work what we will be doing in this partnership, but basically it's a partnership. So it's not just one person doing, teaching something. It's more like some countries may have a case study they want to share to other countries, and other countries can, ask questions, or some of our institution members can talk about what kind of capacity building programs they already have and can that people can utilize. So this is the kind of partnership we have. And here we just have some photos from our launch event at COP27 last year. And we had many, countries participating and institutions also who supported us to launch this. And we also have some collaboration with UNFCCC Secretariat and the World Bank with some letters and memorandum of cooperation. So they are quite closely working with us to help deliver some of these presentations, and also I'll talk a bit more later, but some of what we do in the partnership. And also here I have the list of countries who are already partner countries of this partnership. As of today, we have 68 partner countries and many more institutions. There's over 100 now. So thank you to everyone who already joined. And you can see that we have a diversity of the regions covered. And also I have to mention that also the private sector has joined us also. So this is quite a very diverse. We already have a lot of participation from many stakeholders. So I think you would like to know what exactly are we doing in the partnership. So let me just briefly explain what we are doing. Of course, you can see the QR code on the slide, where we will be posting all of our news updates and any information. So we keep updating the website. So please do check out our website for more details. But as an outline, as of now, we have been focusing on capacity building for countries, because of course, if the countries cannot start Article 6, you cannot implement Article 6. So for now, we have been focusing on the countries' capacity building, and we've been doing these thematic working groups. We just finished the first round of thematic working groups, and we have these 3 groups, one on authorization, the second on reporting, and third on tracking. So we had many countries present about, how they're working on each of these themes. And also we had institutions sharing about some capacity building programs that they have already delivered or also working on. And we also hope to start up more capacity building also for the private sector. And also we are planning to do more, which I have a slide on later. So, okay. And this is the schedule that we have in mind for 2023. As I already said, we finished the first set of the working groups, and the second set of working groups will start in September. And here I wrote plenary meeting. This plenary meeting is open to all our partner countries and institutions. So, if you do join our partnership, you can participate in this meeting. And we have planned for the plenary meeting in September that we will be focusing on regional activities and also talking about the regional collaboration centers and regional alliances. And okay. So this is the slide I wanted to talk about. And then, for the second set of the working groups starting in autumn this year, we are hoping to, start building up more useful tools for countries to use. So we already had, presentations about, UNDP, World Bank, GGGI, so many different capacity building programs already out there. Of course, UNFCCC. So, we will try to, integrate all these diverse information into one place and, make it like easy to see so that, countries can see what do I need for implementing Article 6 and where is everyone on the, tick boxes. And then we will also, in the second set of working groups, we will also be sharing what we found out from all these different stakeholders. So that should be exciting and useful for many people. And lastly, I just want to talk about this side event. So I'm not sure how many of you here will be at the SP58 in Bonn. But if you are planning or already planning to go there, please do find us on June 9th from 10:15 to 11:30 a.m. local time. we will be in the Berlin room, and we will have this side event called Update on Progress and the Way Forward for the Article 6 Implementation Partnership and Market Infrastructure. And the outline shows that we will be updating you about this partnership again. And also we have updates on carbon market related infrastructure by World Bank and other partners. And there will be a panel discussion with moderator Singapore and the panelists Vera, Chile, Sweden, UNDP, and us. And actually, the panel will be discussing, this was one of the questions that was in the chat. So one of the panel discussion questions will be on linkages between Article 6 and voluntary carbon markets, and also role of infrastructure for integrity of the carbon markets, and what kind of institutional arrangements are needed in countries to scale up carbon markets. And finally, what should be the focus of carbon capacity building support to countries. So these will be some of the discussion points of this side event. So if you are going to be in SB, please do find us there. So that was my final slide. Today we didn't have too much time, so I kept it short, but please do visit our website for more information. And also, if you are not yet a partner of us, we do welcome, countries and institutions and other private sectors, or even some, we also have youth who already joined us, So please do consider joining the partnership. And once you can go to our website and click join us and put your email address and information, so that next time we have some new updates, other plenary meetings, you can get the information to join us. So, and any questions, sorry, I would have to leave after this, so I can't stay for the Q&A, but if you do have questions, please do just email us with the following on the bottom. So that's about it. I hope that was okay, Alexandra.
It was excellent. Thank you so much, Koto. 2 attendees raised their hands, so maybe you can address those 2 questions quickly before you leave. The first one is Kalyani. I open the mic for you. You are now unmuted. I don't know. There's okay. So then I go to Alvin.
Maybe.
Also, no question. Okay, so we can follow up then in writing.
Yes, sure. So anytime, please do email us if you have questions.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much
Thank
again.
you very much, everybody, for your participation.
Yeah, good night. It's late.
Thank you so much. Yes, great to meet you all. So hope the next panel goes well too. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Yeah, so the last session of today's public webinar is the panel discussion on private sector engagement opportunities in Article 6. And our esteemed panelists are Urban Benoit-Viri from UNFCCC, Daniel Tutu-Benefor from the EPA Ghana, Edi Medilansky from the Federal Office of the Environment Switzerland, and Alasdair Ware from AITA. May I start with the first question to Urban? So Urban, from your perspective, the private sector is currently not sufficiently engaged in Article 6 projects, at least not at the scale needed. Is the Secretariat considering developing simplified rules under Article 6, for example, for small-scale projects, to increase private sector participation?
Yes, thank you very much, Alexandra, and I welcome other panelists. And my opinion is yes, I agree that there is so much consideration by the Secretariat to enhance the participation of private sector players as far as Article 6 is concerned. This mandate that was given to the supervisory body by the CMA that's the Conference of Parties, which serves as meeting of parties to the Paris Agreement, requested the supervisory body to consider ways in which small-scale businesses and other small-scale private sector players can benefit from the Article 6.4 mechanism, especially. And it is from this mandate that the Secretariat developed a concept note detailing the means and ways through which the private sector participation can be enhanced. This was presented to the supervisory body members at their meeting in March this year. And the supervisory body considered the concept note and also agreed to ensure mechanisms of how the private sector players can be considered. And one of the provisions that they look at enhancing the private sector players is to consider, for instance, simplified methodologies, simplified baselines, including having simplified monitoring and verification requirements. So basically, the work is still ongoing, and the supervisory body will be conducting consultations with the private sector players and then report back to the CMA on how they are taking this work. So in this way, I think this serves as a step in the right direction, because given that it is a CMA mandate, the supervisory body will have to work through all the options that I've outlined and then see that at least private sector players are not left behind, considering the fact that majority missed out during the KP time. So I'm glad that this is taking shape, and we look forward to seeing how the work unveils itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Urbans. But this is then related to what has been done already under the CDM, right? Which is related to simplified methodology approaches for small-scale projects. It is not related to the processes that require, for example, corresponding adjustments. So here, no simplification or shortcuts are considered.
Definitely, it will be handled on a case-by-case basis, depending on how the project is defined. So it will not be a generic kind of consideration for all small-scale projects, but the issue of handling the corresponding adjustments issues, simplified methodological issues, even including baselines, will be looked at on a case-by-case or project-by-project basis.
Yeah, so then we really look forward to seeing progress here, because private sector needs simplification, especially for small-scale projects to be fully engaged.
Yeah, for sure. This is the consideration, especially for countries in the LDCs and also those in the small island developing states.
Excellent, thank you. So then I will go to Daniel. Daniel, you have successfully operationalized Article 6 in Ghana. What are the key elements of a successful engagement in Article 6, based on your first lessons learned?
All right, thank you very much. And good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to colleagues. I wanted to stress a couple of things that have been said already. The first and the most important thing is that carbon market in Article 6 specifically is seen as part of the mitigation policy mix of a country to deliver sustainable development and mitigation outcomes. So we operate in that frequency, that how do we carefully design an international carbon market instrument that would achieve the mitigation targets of the NDCs and beyond, and at the same time leads to promoting green businesses in the country. So that is, for me, is a very important point. The second point that I need to highlight is that we have learned in a very hard way that the time and the effort involved in framing or in designing a national framework and in negotiating a bilateral agreement can be daunting. All right. And therefore, the countries must take into account what it is required to go through a cycle of negotiating and approving a bilateral cooperative approach. It takes, we are now involved in 4 of them now. Our first one with the Switzerland government took almost 12 months. We have done a similar one with Sweden. We have just about finishing one with Singapore. The whole planning process of putting together the business of creating a cooperative approach requires time and effort. And if you juxtapose this against the fact that we only have 7 years in the first NDC period, it will require a lot of innovation to be able to ensure that the regulatory and the policy requirements are in place, and at the same time, the private sector or the projects are also designed in a way that it makes commercial sense. So time is very important in designing this. Then the other point is also that the use of Article 6.2, I think, and it's already been said already, is essentially ought to be done in a way that there's a strong connection between the Article 6.2 and the NDC commitment. I think that for me is a very important, the very essence of 6.2 is to help achieve NDCs and beyond. So how do you deploy Article 6.2 in a way that you do not in any way compromise your own effort of achieving NDCs, and you don't overcredit or oversell? So how do you do that? And you can do that with having a very important government internal infrastructure to be able to see that your participation in Article 6.2 do not, or is within the budget of the NDCs and beyond. That, for me, is a very important point. My last point is also that the government or the countries that are seeking to be part of this must understand or appreciate the amount of work involved in it. And I have prepared a table, all right, and I've compared the effort required on the government part to implement the CDM requirement and that of Article 6.4 and 6.2 requirements on the countries. It is a whole new requirement in terms of administrative and technical functionalities, and the government needs to appreciate that in terms of what to authorize, how to authorize, and when to authorize, and who to report and how to report, and the cost of doing that is a very, it requires a greater involvement of the government, and the government needs to understand who within the government will play this role. And for me, that is very important. It's important in the sense that it is not only to meet the regulations as out there, but the private sector needs this type of efficient system to be put in place. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So you mentioned rightly that the involvement of host countries will.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm speaking to Jess Schofield. Okay, Jess has just sent an email. She told me that you'd like to arrange.
Okay, so sorry for that. Somebody was unmuted. Okay, Daniel, coming back to you. So you rightly said that the involvement of host countries in this project, the strong involvement comes with costs. But at the same time, you also refer to projects that the whole Article 6 framework has to make commercial sense for private sector investors. Otherwise, there won't be any successful project on the ground. So can you maybe reflect a little bit on what you mean with commercial sense? Because I think we saw some concerning developments recently in some countries, which start to shy away already private sector investors. So I would like to better understand what your position in Ghana specifically is.
Okay, so thank you very much for the question. So, I mean, we have designed our 6.2 arrangement in the country with the private sector interest in mind. And let me say this in 3 ways. The first one is the level of certainty and the assurances in authorization. All right. And I think somebody earlier said that in Ghana, we had adopted an ex-ante authorization process, which provides a good positive signal to private sector at the earliest possible time of the project development. So we issue an ex-ante authorization at the point of registration. And then, and in our view, this is very important for private sector. But at the same time, in an effort to ensure that there is high environmental and sustainable development requirement, we have also introduced what we call a positive examination. So once there is validation before issuance is done, we also ensure that the project and the intended outcomes, mitigation outcomes, also meet both environmental integrity and the sustainable development requirements. So that is the first part. The second part is also about the legal nature of the letter of authorizations. So again, we have made the letter of authorization such that there is some level of legal certainty, all right, as to the validity and application of it over the authorization period. And we think that that is a very important and reassuring way of doing that. And within the same point, we are also exploring options for redress, right? Options for legal redress. Should there be any untoward occurrence on meeting the conditions of the authorization? And we think that is also very important for private sector. Then the other critical point is also about the fees and charges, right? And many private sector people that we have engaged had mentioned the need for clarity and in the fees and charges that are imposed by the countries at each stage of the process. And we had done that by really documenting the fees and charges at every stage in the national framework. All right. Last point is also about the eligibility criteria. Private sector, from the very outset, are seeking to understand which projects are eligible under which option. All right. So, for example, we have the red list and the white list and the eligible list. So the clarity around which projects are eligible and which the government of Ghana is willing to authorize and not authorize is also very important. And we think for us is very important. And I think many private sector are trying to understand these type of information.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Daniel. So based on what we see on interest from private sector in Ghana, your framework is obviously very robust and gives the certainty that you refer to private sector actors. And I think we will also engage you in the rollout of future webinars for South-South exchange to allow other countries that are in the process of setting up the Article 6 frameworks to learn from you. So thank you so much. Okay, so then I turn to Eddie. Eddie, you have seen from our first bilateral, from your first bilateral agreements with Ghana and also other countries, with support from UNDP in some cases, that there are many details that need to be considered in advance for a successful project. Please share your first lessons learned in the processes so far.
Yeah, thank you, Alexandra. Greetings from Switzerland. I'm very happy to be here with such a large, interesting audience. Yes, we were very happy last year. The frame of the COP27 Sharm el-Sheikh to have the first worldwide authorization for our first program with Ghana. 2 have followed since then. We still recognize we still at the beginning of a journey. We have not completed yet the Article 6.2 activity cycle that Miguel described. We have 11 project agreement, now 3 authorization, and we hope soon also the first 8 more. I think what we have learned also is that what is very important for an authorization of project is that we consider not only the Paris Agreement and the terms of the bilateral agreement, but also the respective national requirement from each country and an agreement. Because we have a CO2 law which has been updated exactly a year ago, on 1st June 2022. And it's only since then that we regulate the carbon offset activities with partner countries. And in this law, in our national law, we have requirement that emission reduction must be verifiable, quantifiable, and that calculation of emission reduction should avoid significant overestimates. And that means we realize that means concretely that we do not apply automatically, or we cannot accept automatically an established methodology. For instance, CDM methodology, we can have some additional requirement on top. And we learned for that it's very important to keep a close exchange with our partner countries early in the process, so that we learn about our process in country, our national requirements, and that could be very project specific. And then for successful project, I would say what is also useful, and it's an optional step, but could be helpful for project developer, is to submit mains mitigation activity ID notes at the early stage, which do not require too much work, for a first appreciation from both countries, and then we can issue a letter of intent, and that's already a signal if this is in the framework of possible project that can be implemented. Many developers have since then used this opportunity, but it's optional.
So then maybe 2 quick follow-up questions. One related to the main. This is really the eligibility check that Ghana has also. It is really a very brief, short eligibility check, but it does not give this certainty to a project developer that a project will be authorized once the full document is submitted.
Exactly, yes, yes.
And then based on experience, I know that your examination is very detailed, very rigorous. And I would, maybe the audience is interested to understand what the role of the validation report is that you receive. So the validation report is not sufficient for you. You still need to do a very thorough examination in order to be able to authorize the project. So have you ever considered to skip the validation step on your side, or is this something that will never happen?
No, I think this is a very important step. We have to do it. It's in the bilateral agreement also. I can say we take position on the basis of a validated MADD. So that's okay that after that, the MADD is corrected, the MADD can be amended. And in the end, this is why we need this close collaboration with our partner countries. We need a finalized MADD, even if it's modified after validation. And we need to agree on the authorization informally before taking the official steps. I would say maybe also the question is with validator is that this collaboration is also new for them. They're also making first experience, and they are maybe not so familiar yet with our national requirements. So this is also in our feedback to validator. This is how we will try to bring up bring them up to speed and maybe tell them what we are looking in addition to what they have looked, so that future validation maybe require less exchanges afterwards.
Yeah, so this is for sure also a learning process for validators. Yeah, and I hope it will be more smooth in the future, the processes between validations and examinations. Yeah, thank you so much, Eddie. And the last question is to Alastair. So AITA is managing the Climate Action Data Trust, a metadata platform. And from your perspective, how can technology be an enabler for a scaled up carbon market?
Well, firstly, Alexandra, thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you all. So as you mentioned, AITA, in partnership with the World Bank and the government of Singapore, launched Climate Action Data Trust back in December of last year. As we've seen, there are a number of initiatives in the voluntary carbon market aiming to address integrity. Two of the most notable being BCMI and ICBCM, respectively looking at kind of quality of credits and the integrity of claims, both of which are kind of very helpful in terms of scaling carbon markets. But I think what we're looking to address is really transparency in the market, which supports both the integrity of claims and also the quality of credits. The way that we've done that is through creating a metadata layer, effectively aggregating data from both voluntary standards and national registries on a global basis. The way that's been achieved is through a process whereby registries can publish their data through a common data model that allows us to have a clear picture of the state of the market at any point in time, effectively allowing us to see issuance, trading, and retirement data on a global basis. This, I think, becomes increasingly relevant as the market scales and separately fragments. If we look over the last decade, the voluntary market in particular has been dominated by 4 main standards, the largest of which having effectively 70% market share. The voluntary carbon market is increasingly fragmenting. I mean, I think we're seeing almost a new standard popping up onto the market on a weekly basis. And separately, we're moving to a world where we're having national registries and subnational registries. For any individual actor to kind of aggregate and harmonize data, that becomes incredibly challenging and time consuming. So it became, I think, clearly needed for the world to have a kind of common view over the state of the market.
So then you think the Climate Action Data Trust is mainly needed for the voluntary market, or do you also see a strong role in Article 6 for the CAT Trust?
So the work we've done to date is really onboarding voluntary registries. Going forwards, as more national registries come to market, we will obviously be connecting to them. And the hope is to have the majority of national registries connected over the course of this year. I think it's very, very helpful for Article 6 to have something like Climate Action Data Trust. One of the kind of unique functionalities we have is the ability to tag units and projects. So that could be tagging it with a rating, but it could equally be tagging it with corresponding adjustments, depending on visibility that host governments provide. And beyond that, in partnership with both World Bank and UNDP, we're looking at whether you can facilitate tokenization and transfer of credits linked to Climate Action Data Trust. And so we've been doing pilots in the voluntary market with regard to that infrastructure. I think going forward, we may see a number of governments adopting this sort of technology that's incredibly transparent, that is very, very low cost, that puts host governments in the driving seat in terms of issuance and transfer of their sovereign assets.
But the role of the national registries will be key, and without national registries in place, there won't be any connection to the CAT Trust, right? So what do you think is the key need here at country level in order for a country to participate or to connect to CAT?
Well, so the starting point is having a national registry, and obviously both the World Bank and UNDP are doing great work building capacity, providing registries to countries that don't necessarily have one. giving them a lot of capacity building in terms of informing the employees of the Ministry of Environment or whichever relevant department it is, how they can make full use of the registries they're providing. So that's really the starting point. First, you've got to have a national registry, then we can work towards connecting it to Climate Action Data Trust. In the case of the World Bank and the core registry they've developed, that automatically comes connected to Climate Action Data Trust. It's kind of built on top of Climate Action Data Trust. So yeah, I hope that going forward, we'll see all countries connected to Climate Action Data Trust as a way of providing transparency to the projects that they're issuing and authorizing.
Great, yeah. And we are supporting this process, as you said. Great, excellent. Thank you so much to all panelists. So I think there were many additional questions that came in during the panel discussion. Caroline, did you track the questions, and can we address some of them through the panel?
Absolutely. So we have one already here for Daniel. Daniel, so this one would be from Samir Tantawi, who would like to know if you have more information on how you benefited or Ghana benefited from already existing infrastructure of CDM in developing the Article 6 framework. Over to you, Daniel.
Yes, Samir, thanks. I mean, two things. The first one is that we had to build on the experience and the institutional arrangement of the CDM DNA in setting up the Article 6 office. All right. So, I mean, it had gathered experience in issuing letters of no objection, and also in reporting, and also, so we felt that it's important to build on that. So that's the first part. The other part of it is also the shared experience of the CDM era in terms of innovation, all right, in terms of how we can build on the private sector experiences in developing CDM projects and implementing CDM projects. Right? That's a very important point. And therefore, we had looked into how the process of designing an Article 6.2 development cycle that is responsive to both the national requirement and what the private sector knows better, all right, and what works on the ground. The second one is also the experiences from the CDM in terms of monitoring and reporting, right? I mean, at some point in time, the CDM was really facilitating the importance of the use of digital instruments or digital MIB systems, which we think is very important in the 6.2 era. However, and as Eddie said, the CDM could be the basis for us to enhance environmental integrity. And that is also what we are benefiting from. We are also learning from the CDM loan. We want to use part of the corresponding adjustment proceeds that we would get, part of it, to support the development of projects by startups. All right, and we are looking into that very, very, very keenly. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So we have many questions here. So some of them have already been answered. We have a comment from Venezuela, bienvenidos. On the importance of Article 6, we have a lot of, we also have some comments from Rachid Tahiri to encourage the private sector to invest in cooperative approaches. Developed countries are called upon to take tangible measures to de-risk projects carried out in host countries. It's absolutely correct. I can't see any. Okay, so here we have from Gloria Namande. So how can voluntary carbon markets be considered? And this is an important topic to make that distinction. And I think perhaps, Alex, you could even respond to this yourself, but how can voluntary carbon market projects be considered under the reporting on NDC accounting and carbon registries at the national level?
I think this is the perfect question for Daniel, because this is already part of your Article 6 framework and considered there. But I would also like to go to this question that Rashid raised about private sector to invest in cooperative approaches. Developed countries are called upon to take tangible measures to de-risk projects carried out in host countries. So maybe this is something that Alastair could answer.
So let me have a quick think about this. In terms of de-risking investments, I mean, I think one of the things that we perhaps need essentially improved DMRV data. Increased quality of DMRV data will obviously allow better assessments of the underlying projects. Separately, I think IETA is doing a lot of work around risk assessments and risk frameworks. And in coordination with the insurance industry, I think it would be helpful to build insurance products that would allow kind of de-risking of projects, or at least apportioning more risk to insurance companies and third parties versus solely being on the weight of the project developer or the host government. That's probably the starting point that I can think of in terms of how we'd approach this. I think a lot of that fits into some of the work we're doing through D4C with some of the other multilateral institutions in terms of improving access to DMRV data, improving the quality of DMRV data, integrating it more into the methodologies, creating digitalized methodologies, all of which makes it easier for third parties such as insurance companies to assess projects and create insurance products on the back of that.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Alastair. And of course, the carbon payments themselves, they are also a de-risking component for private sector. But Daniel, back to you.
Gloria, thanks for the question. Again, we envisage two very important units, right? So in our view, everything comes down to two things. It comes down to compliance units and voluntary units. And we hold a view that once a compliance unit is authorized by us, we have the obligation to initially report to correspondingly adjust and do all the reporting that come with it. So that for us is very clear. Now, for voluntary units that are not authorized, we are still committed in reporting those units as part of the NDCs, because then they are not authorized and therefore there will not be any accounting that will lead to transfers. So we are also going to report, and we have committed to report on all voluntary units, regardless of the standard that was generated on, and the intention to report all of them against the NDCs. So that is our view, and our view is that this is quite clear, and this is consistent with the Article 6 requirement, in particular, talking about environmental integrity of non-transferable units.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Anne. There's one question about the working group. And I think, Eddie, you wanted to answer this question. What are the steps to join the working group in September 2023?
No, I'm sorry. I'm not sure which working group we're talking about now.
I'm also not sure, but it says Eddie would like to answer this question.
A question to our colleague from Japan, Alex. I think they're going to have a meeting in September. I think.
Oh, okay. This is an old question then. Yeah, so I can't really see any new question. Caroline, did you see anything?
I'm also looking, there are a lot of comments. So I'm going through the comments of the questions and trying to figure out who is for what. Well, there's one on CERs, if they can be issued on VETA or gold standards by the projects in developing countries. And if yes, then how? And if not, then where? That was from Abjit Takar. I'm not sure who would be best placed to respond to that one.
I mean, CRs are issued by UNFCCC. So how does this really, I mean, there can be gold standard CRs, but this is the Kyoto era of credit. So I'm not sure if this is something that we really need to discuss here. There's one comment maybe from Rashid regarding the experience of African countries in the CDM, or the lack of experience in the CDM, which makes it more difficult for African countries to capitalize on past mechanisms, which I think was already addressed by Daniel. And it is certainly true that, that for African countries, there was less activity under the CDM. But as we can see now with Article 6, the leading countries are in Africa. So, but maybe we can go to a very last round of question, which is related to actually a wish that I would like to ask all of you. So what is your wish for how the Paris-aligned carbon markets should develop by 2030? How could carbon-aligned carbon markets look like in 2030? And maybe Urbans, Daniel, Eddie, and Alasdair, in this order.
Yes, thank you very much. And I appreciate the submission that have been made by my fellow panelists and also the questions that came from the participants. So my wish actually for this landscape of the carbon market 2030, I would like to see an all-inclusive carbon market, if I may put it that way, that incorporates a wide range of actors, both parties and non-party stakeholders, because the issue of private sector players cannot be underestimated. Their role may not only be complementary in nature by assisting parties to meet their climate action mitigation targets, but they also provide avenues for capacity building, technology transfer, technology development, resource mobilization, and something like that. So how countries now start developing operational guidelines should be in a way not to disenfranchise private sector players. They should be done in a way that, yes, they provide a leveled playing field whereby there should be transparency on what are the needs that private sector players have to fulfill in order to adequately participate in the Article 6. Secondly, I understand this may not be a fulfilled wish, but in any case, a wish is the price certainty. This depends on market forces, but at least when there is market certainty, there is an incentive that is created for both players, be it governments or private sectors. And when this is done, we will see more proliferation of Article 6 activities in the world. And by seeing this, not only shall countries be able to meet their mitigation actions, not only corporations will be able to meet their net zero targets, but overall sustainable development will be achieved. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erwin. Daniel?
This is a very difficult question, but I'll try. Evan mentioned what I wanted to say, that at the end of the day, we want to see two things. We want to see that Article 6, as part of the mitigation policy mix of countries, deliver sustainable development on the ground. People must have access to sustainable development benefits, access to clean energy, access to efficient way of disposing waste, access to sustainable way of living. And that for us is the essence of the NDCs. And if not at all, it should give us a signal that it can deliver that. And it can deliver so by unleashing and unlocking transformational investment. And that for us is very important. That is what we envisage Article 6 to look like. Number two, we also expect that in as much as there are fragmentations, and we can see fragmentations across boards and lack of clarity, we hope that by 2030, there will be an effort of coherence and clarity, and at the same time, clarity post 2030 for everybody. Right now, we don't know what will happen beyond the ocean. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Eddie?
Yeah, thank you, Alexandra. I have two wishes, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So one, well, as I said before, we're still at the beginning of the journey with this Article 6.2 cooperation. I hope that by 2030, and hopefully before that even, we have then an established carbon market, which is credible and robust, and show indeed an acceleration in the mitigation effort, and support the sustainable development also in our partner countries through the activities. And people who participate to the activities also get their share of money and co-benefits from this activity. My second wish is linked with the Swiss long-term climate strategy for 2050, where we say we will want to reach net zero by then, and only by 2050 and beyond, only unavoidable greenhouse gas emission will be offset. That means through the use of net and CCS technologies. That means by 2030, there should already be an initiation, a start to switch to these new technologies.
Interesting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So then the last panelist, Alastair.
So I think my other panelists have done a fantastic job in terms of summarizing their wishes. They haven't really left me a great deal to say. Other than I think what I really like to see is a framework that it really allows both private sector and public sector to deploy capital scale. I think that can really only be achieved by having kind of clear frameworks that is kind of fostering investment and allowing the likes of the private sector to deploy capital scale, which is really what they're good at, allowing us to achieve our climate goals.
So the tokenization that the CAT Trust will also offer, this could be an additional feature that makes it more bottom-up and smoother for private sector, especially small-scale projects.
Exactly. It could be one of many solutions that will help us collectively meet our goals.
Great. Excellent. Yeah, no, wonderful wishes. We hope they can all be realized. And maybe, Miguel, if you are still around, do you want to also say a few words about your wishes for a future carbon market?
My wish is simple, and I think aligned with Ala's their comment or wish is, I hope that by 2030, in a similar webinar to this, we only discuss those wonderful projects that are having able to attract more than $50 million in investments from the private sector. And that 99% of the market is about that, right? Because if we are able to attract large projects and mobilize last equity investment in project, that means that everything has been done well. There are good frameworks, investment security in the country. Countries accept that investment because it contributes to the sustainable development. There is capacity building because there's money in the market, and there are local project developers because they see money in the market, right? So 50 millions per project, that's my dream, no less. Yeah? Simple dream. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So then, Caroline, maybe can you just summarize the next step for the audience? And thank you so much to all panelists for this wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Alexandra, for the excellent moderation of the panel and once again to all panelists. But then, of course, to our attendees that have stuck with us over 2.5 hours, we appreciate that it was indeed a very long training session. We hope that all the information shared today was useful. And this is just part of the journey. So for UNDP, we're very much committed to the capacity building and supporting our different governments and member states to participate actively in Article 6. We have a lot of opportunities that are coming up, including with the carbon payments for development facility, and of course the bilateral arrangement through Switzerland, but then different opportunities as well. So Alex and I will put our emails into the chat as well. You can reach out to us. I will drop the link once again for all the follow-up information. And on this platform, we will be uploading the recording and then, of course, all the relevant documents. So once again, I thank you all for your participation today. Again, our panelists, we very much appreciate your time, and to our attendees. And we look forward to the next steps on working with you on Article 6. Thanks, everyone. We can now close the webinar.
Thank you, Caroline, and everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.